Welcome, fellow sojourners, to the journey of life. This is going to be a dramatic reading of the first 3 chapters of the book that I'm writing. If you would be interested in hearing the rest, or perhaps reading the rest, the best way to do so is to leave an encouraging comment, or any kind of comment, down below. I personally already know how this book's going to end, and so the only reason for me to write it is if someone else would be interested as well. So you will have something to look at. There will be a painting of a scene from later on in the book. Without further ado, please enjoy. Exponential Escalation, A Store Manager's Journey. Chapter 1. It was a blistering summer day in the parking lot of Billy Bob's ice cream parlor, an ice cream parlor that had taken up residence in the shell of an abandoned Sonic. The remote ordering machines had fallen into disrepair, with panes of glass missing and cardboard out-of-order signs duct tape over the microphones. There was a long line that stretched well into the parking lot. Teenagers, families, college kids, and even a couple police officers were all waiting. It would have been a picturesque scene if it had not been for the stress building in John's forehead as he listened to what the lady at the ordering window had to say. So you're telling me that you have run out of today's special, you do not have any chocolate, and you're also out of vanilla ice cream?
Yes, I am so sorry. It has been a really busy day.
John inhaled, then exhaled slowly. Okay, what do you have?
We have sugar-free peppermint.
John shook his head.
I'm allergic to the artificial sweetener in that. Do you have anything else?
The lady shifted from side to side nervously. Behind her, a man with a distinguished mustache and a very displeased frown walked towards the window. He had a visor with the word manager written on it.
We have frozen pops?
The lady said through a very extremely strained professional smile.
That's fine. It's okay. I'll just get that.
John wanted this interaction to be over with. He had been waiting in line for about 15 minutes.
What flavor do you want?
Oh, please just grab something, is what John thought. But instead he said, What flavors do you have?
It's written on the menu.
John looked up at the menu. When he was a child, his parents had suspected that he was dyslexic. That was not the case. He just had a hard time processing ugly things, and this menu was the definition of an ugly thing. It was an abomination of a word salad perfectly designed to assault the senses and sensibilities. The only thing that John could compare it to would be if a cookout menu sign was written by hand with Sharpie in cursive. He stared at the menu, trying to will the words into something that would make sense. Given enough time, he could decipher this hieroglyphic abomination, but not with the pretty cashier lady and her scowling manager staring at him. Eventually, something on the menu popped out at him.
I would like a vanilla ice cream bar.
The woman's smile became even more strained.
We don't have any ice cream bars either, sir. Just ice pops. Like Freezy Pops?
John blinked. Freezy Pops? Like those frozen treats you can buy for $50 at a grocery store just for a couple dollars? John thought.
Ma'am, I've been waiting in line for 15 minutes, and all that you have are Freezy Pops?
John instantly regretted saying that after the words came out of his mouth. He knew that this wasn't the cashier lady's fault. He was about to apologize when the manager spoke up from behind the lady.
Do you have a problem with me, buddy?
The cashier's lady's eyes widened in fear. John was taken aback. He really didn't want to create a scene, especially not with 2 police officers standing 20 feet to his left. John could sense out of the corner of his eye that they were frowning at the interactions happening at the window. The manager used his elbow to shove the cashier lady out of the way as he leaned through the window, the right side of his curly mustache twitching.
I said, do you have a problem with me, buddy?
Before John's time in the service, He would have been intimidated by the manic display, but now he just found it annoying. His old drill sergeant was twice as intimidating as ice cream parlor manager Billy Bob and his curly mustache. I don't have a problem with you, but you should have let the people who are waiting in line know that you're out of your main product.
Oh, so you think you can tell me how to run my business?
John felt his hackles raise. Well, sir, it would seem that nobody else has.
That's it. Why don't you tell me that to my face?
Billy Bob screamed as he pushed off the window and went storming into the back. The cashier lady's eyes were moist. With her lip trembling, she leaned forward and said,
"Please, just apologize to him. It's not worth it."
Another employee, a boy in his late teens, put his hand around the cashier lady's shoulder and spoke.
"It's too late. Manager has already gone out the back. Come on. He'll be angry if we don't watch."
The young lady's shoulders slumped, and she followed the young boy out the back, leaving John at the window. For a few moments, the only sounds that John could hear were the laughing conversations of families behind him and the whistling of the warm summer wind. Then there was a crunching noise of boots on gravel as Billy Bob came around the corner of the store. He wore a self-satisfied smirk. It was the look of a man who was imagining that he was walking in slow motion. In Billy Bob's right hand, he held a jeweled-encrusted cane that clashed with the aesthetics of his polo shirt and manager visor. Is he going to try to beat me with that fancy-looking cane? John thought wryly. It was an amusing thought despite the tenseness of the situation. Out of the corner of his eye, John saw that the police officers' hands were resting close to their guns. Billy Bob stopped about 10 feet away from John. The wind kicked up dust in between the two men as the other 4 employees of the ice cream parlor lined up along the wall to watch. At this point, all conversation in the parking lot had stopped.
"For the dishonor that you have shown me in my establishment, I, Billy Bob, ice cream manager of Billy Bob's ice cream parlor, challenge you to a duel."
With those words, a deep resonating sound like the toll of a clock tower bell reverberated in the parking lot. There was a clattering noise from behind John. He stole a glance behind him and saw that everyone in the parking lot's heads had turned toward him at uncomfortable angles. The people all had vacant facial expressions, and whatever they had been holding in their hands, whether it be wallet, cell phone, or ice cream, had dropped to the ground. Without a word, they walked to form a circle around the 2 men. Women, men, children, even dogs and cats formed a 30-foot circle, evenly spaced apart, all with that dead-eyed vacant facial expression, silently watching what was about to happen. The cashier lady, who was standing with the other employees along the wall, covered her face with her hands and let out a soft sob. John was taken out of his observations by the grating noise of Billy Bob clearing his throat.
"I suppose I should thank you,"
Billy Bob said with a toothy grin.
"Though you may be a small fish, it is standing on the corpses of betas like you that will allow me to reach greatness."
I don't know what's going on here, but I think this will qualify as self-defense in court, John said in a bored voice. It was amazing how the act of Billy Bob speaking took away any intimidation factor he might have had. The situation was clearly weird and dangerous, but it was just impossible to be intimidated by someone who used beta as an insult.
"In ignorance you live,"
Billy Bob said as he tossed the cane up into the air with his left hand. Grabbing the jewel-encrusted head of the cane with his right, he twisted it. There was a clicking sound, and Bob unsheathed a cane sword.
"And in ignorance you will die."
Billy Bob crouched down to the ground in a modified runner stance, his sword held up by his ear. It resembled the way that someone would hold an arrow at full draw. John could see the muscles of Billy Bob's legs start to ripple as the ice cream manager deepened his crouch. It almost looked like water boiling underneath the man's skin. A slight dip in the man's shoulders and his eyes shifting at John's heart was the only warning. In an explosion that sent shards of gravel back, Billy Bob jumped and instantly closed the distance. Luckily, John had already started to dodge. The tip of Billy Bob's extended sword caught the edge of John's shirt, and in the exchange, John popped the side of the ice cream manager's head with a jab. It happened in an instant, as Billy Bob was still airborne. Having expected to land on top of John, the ice cream manager stumbled off balance on his landing, about 10 feet past his target. Billy Bob attempted to crouch down for another jump, but John would have none of it. Step, jump, spin, jump, 360 sidekick. Although it was not as impressive as a standing jump from 15 feet away, the deep stances of Taekwondo can cover a lot of ground incredibly fast. John sent a flying sidekick toward Billy Bob's face. The manager tried to block it with his sword. The thin rapier-style blade cut deep into John's leg, but it did not have the mass to change the direction of his momentum. Smack! John landed in a deep stance. Then, in a single movement, he jumped forward towards Billy Bob, who was stumbling backwards. The ice cream manager attempted to make distance by slashing with his sword, but the blade was ill-suited for it, and the man's edge alignment was completely off. John took the sword cut to his forearm as he slipped inside of Billy Bob's defense. They were close enough to hug as John let loose a barrage of Muay Thai-style elbow strikes to the man's body and face. Billy Bob was retreating as fast as he could. He pulled his arm back to stab with the sword. John grabbed the blade. He let it cut into his hand while he continued to pummel the ice cream manager with his free arm. They were at the edge of the circle of spectators. Billy Bob tried to step past them, but was stopped by an invisible wall. That was when John decided to end it. John's previous occupation had been in the military, but his hobby was martial arts. He considered himself an amateur, yet amongst amateurs there was no one more enthusiastic to learn. This had led him to many different websites where martial artists and self-proclaimed experts would share their opinions. The act of rubbing brain cells together to create fire oftentimes resulted in the blowing of much smoke. At the butt end of many of these smoke-filled conversations was the martial art Aikido. These anonymous internet experts claimed that the flashy takedowns of Aikido were unrealistic in the chaos of a real-world scenario. It would take either superhuman reaction time or incredibly specific circumstances for it to work, was the argument that was leveled against these techniques. John was intrigued, so he had spent a lot of time practicing. In his studies, he came across a secret that became the key to making it work. Punch him in the face. It was magic. Punching him in the face was the secret ingredient that made the decent dinner into a masterpiece. Reaction time not fast enough for your technique to work? Slow down the opponent with a punch to the face. The opponent knows the counter to the technique? Just punch him in the face. It's a one-size-fits-all to all of life's biggest problems. John had punched Billy Bob in the face many times. It was now time for the takedown. The technique was modified. Originally, the opponent would land on his back. John made sure that he landed on his head. Smack! The dust cleared away as John stood there, panting and bleeding over top of Billy Bob. Do you yield? John panted out. Billy Bob did not respond. There was a moment before he realized that Billy Bob might be looking directly at him, but the man was not blinking. Slowly, the body began to turn gray. Then, without warning, Billy Bob and everything he was wearing except for the sword and manager visor turned to ash. The gray ash dust floated up into the air. To John's confusion and mild panic, the ash flew towards him like metal shavings towards a magnet. Upon hitting John's chest, they were absorbed into his body. The manager visor then floated into the air. Stopping at John's head level, it floated there for a second, as if it was looking the man in the eye. Then, in an instant, it flipped around and launched itself at John's head. Despite the speed, it landed with no impact. It felt like he was wearing a hat made of air. John stood there with his mouth agape. His eyes were wide as saucers as he stared at the spot that the ashes had been absorbed into his chest from. There was a moment of silence before a shuffling sound made him look up. All 4 of the ice cream parlor employees had gotten on their hands and knees and were kowtowing. Keeping their foreheads to the ground, they called out, "The manager is dead! Long live the manager!" Chapter 2. Take charge of the situation. That was the mantra that John's mentors had drilled into his head over his career as a soldier. Although this situation was the most bizarre thing he had ever encountered, it was certainly not the most dangerous. Take stock of the situation, define the problem, come up with solutions. John had 3 problems that he could think of at the moment. His new 4 employees didn't know what to do in this situation. His new ice cream store was out of ice cream. And of course, he was leaving little puddles of blood wherever he stood. John clapped his hands together to get the employee's attention. He winced at the pain. Probably need to get stitches, he thought. John kept his eyes up. "All right, guys, get off the ground. Finish making the orders that you already have taken, and then we will close up shop." John turned to the crowd of customers who were milling about and their line to the ordering window. "I am sorry for the inconvenience, but we are out of ice cream, and we will have to shut down. We will open again in, 2 days. John contemplated how normal things are in the weirdest experiences, when taken out of context. As the customers grumbled and started shuffling away, nobody noticed that he was standing in a puddle of his own blood. There was a couple customers who were upset, so John told them that if he wrote down their names and numbers, that he would get them free ice cream the next time they showed up. It took a few moments of scrambling through the ice cream parlor's office to find a blank notepad. One of the employees, a young man by the name of Henry, had to write down the information, due to John leaving bloody fingerprints on everything he touched. While the customers were being appeased, John tended to his injuries. He couldn't find any first aid kit, so he made do with a roll of duct tape and some paper towels. After he was taken care of, John got Henry to drive him to the hospital. The cuts were deep, and would probably need stitches. John was standing in line, waiting to be seen in the ER. He had gotten Henry to drive him up. The boy looked like he could have still been in school, so John told him just to drop him off at the entrance. On the drive up, Henry had explained the situation. Apparently, there was a secret community of business owners who fight to claim power from each other. It worked a little bit like the Highlander. The winner of a duel gets property and key from the loser. You don't have to kill the opponent to get their key, but you will get less energy if you win by forfeit. The process can only happen if a formal duel has been challenged, and the only people who can see what's happening are members of the community. Once a duel is challenged, a barrier will form around the contestants. It will be made equal to the total sum of power from everyone in the area. It is technically possible for someone to enter the barrier after it's been created, but it would take an overwhelming amount of power to do so. The only way to become a member of the community is to be invited by someone who has reached a manager status. Billy Bob had discovered that challenging someone to a duel counts as being invited into the community, and he had used that knowledge to harvest key from customers. Basically, he was a serial killer. Apparently, the local chain restaurants were supposed to keep people like Billy Bob from abusing this power. Henry did not know why they did not intervene. "Excuse me, are you a manager?" John was startled out of his thoughts by a voice to his left. It was coming from a stout-looking nurse with a professional smile. "Excuse me, sir. If you're a manager, please come this way." The young woman led John out of the line to an unassuming door that John had not noticed up until now. On the other side of the door was a hallway, and at the end of the hallway was an examination room. John sat down on the examination chair while the nurse wordlessly bustled out of the room with an almost bored facial expression. For a few moments there was nothing but the ticking of a clock. After a while, John started to fidget. He peeled up the duct tape bandage to look at his wound. It had stopped bleeding. The gash was a very deep red color, and John saw that it would open and close like a fish mouth every time he moved his pinky finger. The effect reminded him of a Muppet. John laughed at the image of putting googly eyes on his arm to turn himself into a flesh puppet. John was again startled out of his thoughts by the opening of a door. A man strode into the room, wearing a lab coat that seemed to be billowing behind him like rolling morning fog. The man had silver gray hair that was tied in a ponytail behind him, and a face that looked like he could have been in his 30s for the last 60 years. "What seems to be the problem here?" "I have a cut on my hand." John held up his hand for emphasis. The doctor took out a pair of spectacles and looked down his nose at the wound. How did you get that?" "I was cut with a sword." "Any tingling sensations or loss of feeling?" "I don't think so." "Has your teeth or hair or fingernails started falling out?" "What? No." "Have you felt any itchy sensations anywhere in your body, or loss of concentration?" "No itchy sensations until you started mentioning that, and I'm always losing concentration." "Have you lost any of your internal organs during bowel movements?" "What? If that were the case, I think I would have led with that, sir." The doctor then narrowed his eyes at John. There was an awkward moment of silence between the two men. "Do you take any performance-enhancing drugs?" "No." The doctor started fishing around for something in his pocket. "Please hold out your hand, palm up." John held out his hand. The doctor put a pill in it. "Swallow this." On reflex, John popped the pill in his mouth and swallowed. It was a reflex that had been trained into him over the course of his career. That tone of voice that made him just respond. It was only after that he had swallowed, John thought to ask, "What did I just take?" "It was a healing pill. For healing." "Well, wait. You didn't tell me what you were giving me before you just administered medicine. I didn't even sign any papers." The next thing John knew, there was a pen in his hand and a legal-looking document in front of him. John was not sure how it got there. It was just 1 minute not there, and the next minute right in front of him. "Sign right here." On reflex, John signed the paper again. He was conditioned to respond quickly to commands. Again, it was only afterward that he thought to ask, "What did I just sign?" "It was a paper. You said you wanted to sign a paper, so I thought it would make you feel more comfortable." John spluttered, but before he could say anything else, the doctor interrupted him. "Look down at your hand." John looked down at his hand. To his amazement, the wound was completely healed. "See? Healing pill. For healing." The doctor made a few hand gestures like he was painting with an invisible paintbrush. With a whooshing sound, the pen and paper zoomed towards the doctor's pocket and got absorbed into the folds of his lab coat. The doctor then leaned forward to examine John's face. Look, I can tell that you're new to this. Next time you get injured, you should talk to your manager before going to the hospital. We are very expensive, and the amount of energy that you have absorbed would mean that your wound would probably have been healed in about 2 days. People don't usually go to the hospitals unless they're missing limbs or are mortally injured. Here, take this lollipop." The doctor guided John out of the examination room and down the hallway. He opened the door for John as he walked out. The doctor said, "I would avoid doing any humming bee breath cultivation techniques for the next 24 hours. This includes Gregorian chants and barbershop quartets." With that, the doctor closed the door. John was slightly dazed at what had just happened over the last several hours. The night air was cold as he walked out of the hospital. John had a problem. He had been planning on finding a place to sleep for the night after he had gotten some ice cream. John had just hitchhiked into town with no real plan in mind. No home, no car. Now, John's cell phone was completely dead. He had no idea where the local hotel could be. There was only one place that he knew how to get to in this town. "Well, technically, I own Billy Bob's Ice Cream Parlor now, so it shouldn't be a problem if I crash there for the night. I think I need to change that name." John started walking down the road towards his ice cream parlor. Chapter 3. A true, beautiful spreadsheet is a work of art. Arguably, it is the best medium of art to achieve that unattainable goal of every artist, the goal to reach across the barriers of time and space and touch the heart of a reader in a specific way to achieve a controlled result. There are mediums of art that can touch the reader, and of course there are other mediums that can communicate succinctly, but there is no medium so suited to both tasks than the workings of a master of Microsoft Excel. At least according to the Masters of Microsoft Excel, which John is certainly a member. John had been manager for about 2 months. That thought made him inhale, then exhale slowly. It was kind of crazy to think about. 2 months and 15 minutes ago, he had no idea that this would be what his life would be like. Now he was working at a computer in his very own office. It was nice. Even though he was part of some weird secret organization where people could challenge him to a duel, John's life was strangely normal. The majority of his days were spent helping out in the kitchen, doing paperwork, and researching how to run a business online. After the customers leave at the end of every day, John would spend a couple hours renovating the building. Because his employees would see him working when they would come in the morning, and he was always still working when they would leave, they started joking that John just didn't sleep. The truth was that John still didn't have a home. He had spent all of his money that he had saved up for a house and a car on renovations for the building. It was all right, though. There was an office chair to sleep in, and a gym 5 minutes walk away for showers. Food was a problem at first, until John bought a stove for the kitchen. From his childhood, he knew how to make homemade flour tortillas, so he started selling steak and chicken tacos on the menu. It ended up becoming the best-selling item they had. John was currently redesigning the menu for the outside of his restaurant. Burning the old menu had been the first act of manager. Just thinking about the original menu sign gave John a headache. Not only was the information hard to read, it was unnecessarily bloated. Billy Bob's original strategy seemed to be to try to impress the customer with a wide variety of choices. The problem was his ice cream parlor did not serve a wide variety of products. Just because you put sprinkles on the ice cream doesn't mean you can call it something else. It seemed to John it would be much better to impress them with the quality of his work rather than lie to them with a dishonest menu. Luckily, no one could read the original menu, so it didn't really matter. John leaned back in his chair. Some people would say Microsoft Excel was a bad thing to design a menu on, but that's just because they had never seen one of John's spreadsheets. He had studied the Tao of Microsoft Excel for a long time. There were other programs that were better suited to making pretty pictures, but that wasn't the purpose of a menu. John wanted his customers to feel comfortable ordering. Besides, he had an employee who would probably be excited to add some decorations to make the sign shine. Catherine, a young woman who had been the original person to take his order, offered to help him paint some tables outside one day. She had asked if it would be all right to add little teeny flowers. After looking at the quality of her work and seeing how much she enjoyed it, John gave her the go-ahead to decorate as much as she wanted, as long as she was on the clock. He knew that Catherine would probably be overjoyed to add some flourishing touches to his menu when he's done. In fact, he really had to enforce that whole on-the-clock rule. She got so focused when she started working, she probably wouldn't go home if he didn't make her. "Hey, boss, we're going to open in 5 minutes," Henry called from the kitchen. "All right," John called back. "I'll get the dough ready." John stretched and walked to the storage room. When he entered, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. John's survival instincts registered a presence in the room a moment before his eyes had finished processing what was in front of him. Sitting on top of one of the storage racks was a young man in a 7-Eleven uniform. He was in a half-crouched position, with his head turned slightly away. A knowing smirk played across the man's lips, making the overall impression of someone posing for a 2000s emo cover band. Not having expected to be in this situation, John said the first thing that came to his mind. "What are you doing?" Despite the fighting instincts being on full alert, John's voice came out calm. The young 7-Eleven edgelord turned to look at John. The man's smirk widened into a grin, exposing way too many teeth.
Relax, John. I'm not here for a fight. I come with a message from my boss.
The young man's voice was rhythmic, sounding like someone reciting poetry in a smoke-filled room. The man looked down and to the right, letting his bangs partially obscure his eyes.
See, I represent a man by the name of Mr. Floyd.
He accented the words Mr. Floyd by tilting his head to look at John before quickly turning away again. It was like the man only ever moved from one dramatic pose to another.
Mr. Floyd is very intrigued by your recent activities.
Sir, you need to leave. We're about to open. John could feel his heart rate increase from the stress. It was more the anxiety of social conflict than the threat of danger. John was always more comfortable in a fight than an argument. The young edgelord dramatically pushed his hair out of his eyes and looked into the track lighting on the ceiling. Did he practice that in a mirror? John thought. Probably not. He wouldn't be doing it if he knew how silly he looked.
No need for hostilities, friend,
the man said while still looking up.
Here, let me give you a taste of what a friendship with 7-Eleven could do for you. Do you know that sword that you keep in your office? If I were you, I would keep it in the kitchen today. You might need it.
Sir, you need to leave right now. John took a step forward. Despite the edgelord's antics, John's instincts told him that the man could move at a moment's notice. The edgelord raised his hands placatingly.
Fine, I will leave.
He flicked his wrist, making a business card appear in between his fingers.
If you change your mind and want to talk, you can call this number. Oh, one more thing. You have to watch out for those chain restaurants. They like to attack from behind. You know, chain restaurant employees do.
The man tossed a business card to John. John caught it and looked up. The room was empty. The next several hours represented a typical Friday night. Scoop the ice cream, smile at the customer, cook the taco, take money and smile at the customer again. Despite the uncomfortable weirdness of that interaction with the edgelord, the idea of giving out business cards via card trick was pretty cool. John considered whether he could justify buying business cards for his store. He wasn't entirely sure what an ice cream parlor/taco joint would use business cards for, but John decided to learn some basic card tricks just in case. A flash of color caught John's eye. It was the jewel-encrusted cane leaning by the window. He had decided to take the advice of the young man and bring it to the kitchen. It cost him nothing to keep it there. The only reason why John kept it in the office was because he thought it was in bad taste to keep the pimp staff in a place of work, especially considering it was used by Billy Bob. John looked up at Henry, who was working at the cashier register. Hey, bud, it's about time for break. I'll take over in about 15 minutes.
Thanks, boss,
Henry called back. John walked over to the cash register and began taking orders. There was a man several spaces back in line that put John on edge. It wasn't his appearance. He was an ordinary-looking man, wearing a gray button-down, a Taco Bell manager's uniform. The thing that made him seem off was the fact that the man was making direct eye contact with John, and had been ever since he stepped into the parking lot. John only saw him blink once. It was a slow blink, like the man had to intentionally make the decision to close his eyes. After 5 minutes of this, it was almost a relief when the man came to order. Welcome to John's Ice Cream Parlor. What can I do for you today? John said in a bored voice. Man, I really need to come up with a better name, John thought. The young man looked up through his nose at John. He had the look of disdain on his face. Do you know who I am? How would I know anything about you? You don't even have your name tag on, is what John thought. What he said was, I don't believe so.
I am the young manager of Taco Bell on 8th Street.
Huh, I guess I did know that, John mumbled to himself. The arrogant young manager continued like he didn't hear John.
I am here because of a disturbing rumor involving tacos. Are you an ice cream parlor manager selling tacos at this establishment?
Yep. John wasn't sure where the man was going with this, but he guessed he was along for the ride. The Taco Bell manager stumbled back, clutching his chest in shock. You are selling tacos when there is a Taco Bell 2 streets over? Did you not consider that this town already has tacos? At this point, the man was half shouting. John was unfazed. He felt Henry and Catherine come up behind him. John did not know if it was a form of curiosity or solidarity against an irate customer. John responded in a calm yet irritated voice. Personally, I think ours are better. Would you like to try one and find out? The color drained from the young manager's face as he clutched at his hair in absolute shock. The arrogant young manager pointed one shaking finger at John and screamed, You are courting death! There was a gasp from one of the people in the parking lot. It was more from the fact that a guy just randomly yelled than from what he actually said. Still, the effect was on point for the situation. John kept the amusement off of his face as he leaned forward in the window and said in a menacing voice, Get off of my property. For a moment, the two men glared at each other. The arrogant young manager ground his teeth, his face a contorted mask of rage, before he opened his mouth and spat out the words, I challenge you to a duel. With those words, a deep resonance reverberated through the store. All of the customers in the parking lot dropped whatever they were holding and began to circle the young manager. Henry pushed forward to the window with an angry look on his face. What the heck is wrong with you, man? I thought Taco Bell Clan was supposed to stand for righteousness. The arrogant young manager was about to respond when Henry cut him off by pointing out the window to the right of the building. There were 2 men and a woman attempting to complete the circle around John and the Taco Bell man. Unfortunately, since John was inside the building when he was challenged, half of the circle was through the wall of the building. In their dazed state of mind, the unfortunate people were attempting to walk through the wall by ramming into it repeatedly. John could see a bruise forming on one of the man's foreheads, and the woman already had a bloody nose. Even I know to wait until an opponent is outside, and I don't even have a master. The arrogant young manager's face turned red in embarrassment. Those head injuries concerned John. The way they were repeatedly smacking into the wall could become life-threatening if the situation did not resolve quickly. Still, John would avoid bloodshed if he could. Henry, John said while keeping eye contact with the Taco Bell manager. As long as someone forfeits, nobody needs to die for a duel to be over, right? With a smirk, the Taco Bell manager leans forward. As expected from a cowardly unaffiliate like yourself, forfeit now, and your customers will be... He was interrupted by John, quickly placing one hand on the counter and using it to jump over. While in midair, John spun his body around and slammed both feet into the Taco Bell manager's face. The young man managed to stay on his feet, but he stumbled back about 8 paces. John landed lightly and began walking towards the other man, cocking both of his fists like a street fighter. I would recommend you give up quickly before I beat the living daylight out of you, John said in a conversational tone. The Taco Bell man regained his composure. His face flickered through several emotions before it settled on a look of absolute rage. The veins on his forehead and tendons in his neck began to bulge as he stepped into a deep middle stance. The man's face turned red as a cartoon tea kettle, and he began to roar. I will live Moss! Without warning, the man's shirt exploded off of his body, revealing a 12-foot-long brass chain. It was connected to the base of the man's spine, looking like a scorpion tail. Each link was slightly smaller than the one before it, creating a bullwhip effect. With a twitch of the man's shoulder, the chain whipped towards John's face. The speed was equal to that of a rattlesnake. John's weave to the right barely got him out of the way in time as the chain cracked beside his ear. Instead of a bullwhip noise, there was a loud metallic ringing that made John's vision go double. Since the chain was right beside John's hand, his instincts made him grab it as it was retreating. The force was strong enough to pull John forward. Instead of fighting against it, John bounced on the balls of his feet and allowed his body to be flung towards his opponent. When someone studies the martial arts, it is inevitable that that person will come across certain moves that are extremely situational. Self-defense gurus and internet experts tend to scoff at these techniques. They say it's a waste of time to practice because the opponent will not cooperate with you into getting to the right position for you to perform your special technique. The thing is, they are missing the point. Not every technique is about its individual practicality. Some moves are designed to teach principles so that you'll have a foundation for lessons taught years down the road. On top of that, some of these moves are just pretty darn cool. For this reason, a true martial artist will continue to practice these seemingly nonsensical moves. Then one day, the stars will align. Against all the odds, he will find himself in that very same position, and because he practiced those techniques, his body will respond. John found himself in that position today, hurtling towards his opponent from slightly above with one of his knees tucked, his left hand outstretched, holding onto the chain, and the right hand cocked back for a Superman punch. There was a moment of silence before the arrogant young Taco Bell manager keeled over like a fainting goat. John stared down at the man for a moment before nudging him with his foot. Do you yield? For a moment, the only sound in the area was the thud-thud of the people attempting to walk through the wall. With a growing sense of dread, John realized what was going on. He bent down to check the man's pulse. He's unconscious, John called to Henry and Catherine, who were staring at him with eyes the size of saucers. I have a pillow and a blanket in the office. Go get them. We'll use it to cushion the heads of the people while we wait for this moron to wake up. John walked up to the window while he was waiting for his employees to come back with the cushions. Catherine came running up with the pillow and blanket in her hand, Henry trailing after her. She handed them over and tilted her head to the side. Here you go, boss, but what are we going to do about the others? Others? John says, with a scowl and a raised eyebrow. Henry stepped forward, placing a hand on Catherine's shoulder. There are people stuck on both sides of the building, boss. Looks like some kids and their mother. If there was one thing that his previous life had taught him, it was that there are some situations that require immediate decisions. John looked at Henry. Toss me the cane. Henry grabbed the cane and tossed it to John, who caught it, dropping the blanket and pillow. I didn't retire from the military to deal with this shit, John said as he unsheathed the sword. With brisk strides he approached the sleeping man. He could feel tears start to sting his eyes. It's not fair. It's not frickin' fair, John thought as he was about to reach the man. All of a sudden, a noise made him stop. It was a muted rushing noise, like listening to the sound of a tornado with noise-canceling headphones on. John looked up in time to see what appeared to be a gray meteorite hurtling toward them at terminal velocity. In an instant, the object went from a dot in the sky to right on top of the barrier. Reality buckled. Reality bent. Then reality shattered. There was a noise similar to the reverberating resonance from the start of the duel, except this time it was a screeching, screaming, shattering sound, like the twang of metal from a collapsing skyscraper. All around John, the images of the dead-eyed spectators warped and bent like they were seen from a funhouse mirror, as the object landed in between John and the sleeping man. The object stood up. It was a man. The largest and most muscular man John had ever seen in his life. His veins looked like they were attempting to leap out of his body. His arms looked like he could throw a gorilla like a baseball. He looked like he could hit a home run just using his pecs. His jawline looked like he could take a bite out of a coconut. The man stood about 2 heads taller than John, It took John a moment to realize that the man was wearing the gray of a Taco Bell manager uniform. The man looked down at John with his emotionless 100-mile stare. He then spoke in a voice that resonated like a church bell. By the power invested in me as the Taco Bell regional manager, I declare Song Lee forfeits this match. With those words, ash-like substance levitated out of the young sleeping manager's body and absorbed into John. All around, the spectators collapsed to the ground as reality began to right itself. The giant of a man bent down and grabbed the sleeping manager by the shirt. Throwing him over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, he turned to John and spoke again. Lee here was in the wrong for challenging someone without learning of their capabilities or morality. This attack was not ordered by me or any of my subordinates. Still, he is my grandson. I cannot allow or ignore the fact that you would have killed him. To save face, I will return in 1 week, and I will kill you. The man then made a few hand gestures like he was drawing on air. All of a sudden, a large Chinese sword fell from the sky and stopped, hovering about 4 feet off the ground. The large man hopped onto the sword, balancing on it like a surfer. He looked back down at John. There was no emotion in his face. Do not try to run, or I will kill 7 generations of your family. With that, he flew off into the air. In a few moments, he was gone. John was left standing in the parking lot, surrounded by unconscious people, completely dumbfounded. His thoughts swirled around in a chaotic mess. That man looked like he fell from low orbit. How in the world is he not dead? John thought. He knew the power of a kinetic strike from that height could level an entire house. Oh crap, he's coming for me in a week. That thought was immediately cut off by another one. 7 generations? How in the world would that even work? Mathematically, you shouldn't be able to get more than 5. John's thoughts began overlapping each other in his mind, cutting each other off until it turned into a loud blur of a dial tone. He has always been a bit ADD, but it takes something extremely out of the ordinary to get him rattled. The feeling of something in his pocket knocked some sense back into him. John pulled it out to see the business card with a phone number and a name. Mr. Floyd. John looked down at the business card. It was time to make a decision. He had a phone call to make.